this is a week for cultures and societies of Arab-speaking country with Save Cultural Heritage Group. So this week we will be covering North Africa and the North African Arabic countries of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia and Libya, and a bit of reflection on it being the gateway of Europe for migration, and also any common cultural heritage between them. So last week we did cover the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the creation of Arab or modern Arab states. So to proceed, the part one is about Morocco. And Morocco, or Al-Maghreb as we call it in Arabic, the name is derived from the word far west, because it was believed to be the further west country of the Islamic Empire. And the Arabs first arrived in northern Africa in the 7th century. Before that, there were multiple sovereigns that took over the area, such as the Romans and the Vandals, and then after the Arab conquest did spread fastly in the area, gaining some independence from the Berbers for a while, but then taking over again until the Islamic Caliphate reached southern Spain for a couple of hundreds of years and then retreated. So Morocco has been the gateway from Africa to Europe for centuries. It has served as an important point in Islamic history, as during the Caliphate, Al-Maghreb was not just referred to as Morocco, but it was all the stretch of the countries that exist today, Algeria, Libya, and Tunisia. So it was all this area that was called Al-Maghreb. So Morocco has a very distinct culture. It has a very rustic and traditional way of life that has attracted a lot of tourism. So we do know that Morocco has had a booming tourism for the past few decades, and continues to do that. It has a beautiful coast, amazing food, and a lot of handicraft that are sold in the markets. It has also a very warm and dry climate. Politically, Morocco has had some issues with Algeria regarding to sub-Saharan Africa and other issues such as drug trade and so on. Other than that, Morocco has been quite a stable country, and the independence it gained also was stable. So in the PDF that we will be following a bit about Morocco, from location, geography, from foods, demography, linguistic affiliation, to arts. So we can cover a bit quickly now for part one. So Moroccans, as other North African countries, do have French as a second language. French is also taught in school and is also used as a prestige language on the street or in any other offices and at work. The ethnic relations in Morocco is a division between Arabs and Berbers, or a mix of them. You have the more remote areas in the Rif and the biggest cities that proclaims to have a larger Arab communities. However, generally, the Berbers and the Arabs and the mix of it live peacefully in Morocco. So there are no issues there. When it comes to urbanism architecture, Morocco has a very eclectic influence and has had some influence in many buildings in north and southern Spain, for instance, as this is where the gate to Europe was, more or less. So this is where the Moors, it is believed, was referred to as. and the traditional Arab mosques are beautifully intricate, and the traditional carvings and wood carvings and plaster carvings in Morocco are well known around the world. When it comes to foods, for instance, Morocco has, like other North African countries, semolina as a base and meat. There is a bit more information about marriage, family kinship, religion, and etiquette, which you can read yourself on the PDF. Morocco is, from what I can as an experienced traveler, I can say to you that the most striking cultural influence that Morocco has had, or the impression it has given to people visiting, is the rustic, traditional, and very earthly cuisine, markets, and land, and it's a very beautiful country. So I hope you do enjoy the reading, and on to next part 2. To Algeria. So Algeria is a country that resides next to Morocco. It is one of the largest countries in Africa, and it has a large part of it is Sahara, or the desert, further up the coast. That is where the majority of the population resides. Algeria has had a troubled past, especially during the French reign, or 132 years of French reign, starting in 1813 and then ending around 1950s. So it is well known in history books about the Algerian War of Independence from France in 1958 that led to massacres and civil war, as there was a large French population that lived in Algeria and continued to do that for decades. Algeria was actually seen as part of French protectorate, and it was quite difficult for France to let go of the country. Like other North African countries, Algeria has a large population of Berbers and those that claim to be of Arab descent, and also a mix of those. There is also French as the second language, or the prestige language, and also used in more formal settings. Algeria is not a touristic country, so to be able to enter you will need a visa. However, there are many areas to visit and many old historical sites, such as the Roman temples that still exist today in parts of northeast Algeria, such as in Jamila. So there are many areas you can visit. When it comes to food-wise and cultural-wise, it is quite similar to Morocco, with a bit of course, their own traditions. So we have also couscous as the main food, and also when it comes to architecture, it does have some French influence, and also the intricate designs in mosques are beautifully, shown around the cities. So the demography is also covered in the text, the linguistic affiliations, also as mentioned, the ethnic relations, which is Berbers and Arabs. There was also a population of Jews in Algeria, like in other North African countries. There is also some information about urbanism, such as the largest city being Algiers, and that is where the name Algeria is derived from. So it was a center for Phoenicians, used as a trading center, and it served as the colonial capital under both the Turkish and the French. So Algiers has an important status in the country. There is also the second largest city, Oran. I have covered about the gender status, for instance, that in Arabic culture in general, women are considered domestic, so to stay domestically at home and take care of the family, while the father or the man is the one that should provide. And therefore, when you roam the streets of many cities in Algeria, you will notice that there is a larger male population outside than females. So that's quite interesting to notice. I have also covered a bit about marriage and family, and that just like Morocco, some arranged marriages are quite common, not between cousins or families. Instead, the families or the matriarch of the family finds a suitable match for their sons, etc. There is also a part about greetings that involves lengthy and involved inquiries of families and so on. There is also a religion, which shows that 99% of Algeria is Sunni Muslim. The arts in Algeria are also quite developed, and during the French regime, Algerian culture was largely suppressed and then began flourishing after its independence. So on to part 3 now. Tunisia. So Tunisia is a fairly smaller country residing next to Algeria and Libya. So it is a country between these two. It has the important historical center Carthage. That was a Phoenician center for centuries. The Tunisian has been predominantly Arabic-speaking and Muslim since the Islamic dynasties. It did have for a while a Vandal kingdom that was later on taken over by the Romans, and Tunisia was ruled by the Husseini dynasty of Beys, the Ottomans, from 1705 to 1957, and then eventually became a French protectorate or a French colonial administration. So French is the second language also used in formal settings in Tunisia. Tunisia has a booming tourist attraction, if you can say that. It has its main financial gain is tourism, more or less. It has beautiful beaches, restaurants, and its population are slightly more modernized than other North African countries, especially Algeria, so they are more open to the world. We do know that in the recent decade there was the demonstrations that were taking place and the change of regime that did destabilize the area with terrorism attacks as well. However, Tunisia is regaining its stability for the past few years. I have covered as well location and geography, as I find that very important to understand how the climate and so on has an effect on the population. It is quite an arid country with its main population also living along the coast, while many areas are desert. Also, when it comes to linguistic affiliations, as mentioned, fluency in French is regarded as high class, and Arabic is also taught. The dialect of Tunisian Arabic is slightly different from Algerian and Moroccan, so you can actually sense a bit of more Middle Eastern influence on the dialect. When it comes to urbanism, architecture, etc., Tunisia is dominated by its capital city, Tunis, which is the largest center in the country. The other main cities are along the coast, and also many of its architecture are fairly new, adapted for tourism, such as hotels and so on. However, the classical town in Tunisia includes a main mosque, a market, and a public bath, and that's very interesting, as all three are sites for interaction. Also, there are French and colonial and Turkish remnants in the architecture. There are also many rural villages further south, and people actually seek privacy by distancing themselves from neighbors. So it's slightly different from the main cities. Food in daily life, traditional Tunisian cuisine reflects local agriculture. So we have also couscous as one of the main dishes. Also, their foods are slightly more spicy, with pastas as well involved. Due to being so close to Italy. That's also interesting. When it comes to gender status, you will find that Tunisia is slightly more modernized. So that's the word I'm using again. When it comes to the status of women, women are quite active in society. There is religious freedom when it comes to wearing or not wearing the scarf, and Tunisians are more or less active. Both genders are quite active in society, especially young Tunisians. So when it comes to choice of marriage, partners may be arranged between families, or it's an individual selection. So as mentioned, there is a slight difference in mentality. I have covered some etiquettes and religion, which is also 99% of Tunisians are Sunni Muslims, and a bit about the arts. So that's on to part 4. For Libya. So Libya is a fairly larger country that resides between Tunisia and Egypt. Libya also has quite a rich history. The interesting part about Libya is that it historically hasn't known any sovereignty. So what it means is that there was only a set of connection between cities and tribes, rather than a centralized government. So it has been a quite autonomous area when it comes to the countryside, rather than the central and integrated rule. So that has been quite an interesting development to become later on one of the greatest country in northern Africa, especially for its oil during the reign of Gaddafi. So there was some civil clashes for the past few years, or about a decade ago, and that has also to do with how autonomous Libya is. So you have tribes that are scattered around the country that have taken over areas, and also has some kind of sovereignty over these areas and managing their own affairs. So that has been one of the reasons there has been some clashes between these autonomous tribes. So Libya has also a large stretch of coast on the Mediterranean, the location and geography. So it is situated in the coast of North Africa, of course, as well, and it borders Egypt, and it has quite an arid climate, slightly more actually than the other three North African countries. When it comes to demography, it has a extremely small population compared to its vast land. That's also very interesting. In the desert areas, you have also quite an isolation between the tribes, like mentioned, and the cities and the towns. So that's quite interesting. The country grew rapidly during the 60s. So between 1954 and 1964, the citizen population of Tripoli actually grew by 58% due to the oil boom. So the oil industry did bring a large amount of wealth, and also a large numbers of Europeans and North American countries to the North Americans to the country. So oil revenues allowed the state to greatly expand, and has had an effect on the economy and the workforce that exists today in Libya. Libya is a fairly traditional and very Arabicized country. It did have some Italian influence in its culture and political sphere. However, Arabic is the main language, and also Sunni Islam is the main religion. They are more traditional, more rigid when it comes to Islamic practices than other North African countries, and also less open to tourism. So that's quite interesting. I have covered a bit about national identity, especially when it came to the rule of Muammar Gaddafi, that emerged as a leader of the country, and there was social experiments that were made during that time, and the majority of Libyans have pride in the nation, the birth of the nation, and especially the national martyr or person, which is Omar al-Mukhtar, which is one of the revolutionaries against the Italians. There is also a bit about ethnic relation, as Libya also has a Berber population that has their own customs and traditions, and also has a large Bedouin population of Bedouin Arabs that, as mentioned before, have their own settings and rules. When it comes to urbanism and architecture, modern Libyan architecture throughout the country reflects the impact of its booming wealth during the 60s, and modern apartment buildings and governments. So the cities are very different from rural areas due to the amount of wealth that entered large cities during the oil boom. There is also foods, which is similar to other North African countries, being couscous its staple food, and also meats. However, the daily life of Libyans, or the foods in the daily life of Libyans, reflects the simplicity of peasant and nomadic lifestyle. So you do notice in the text that Libyans have a pride in their Bedouin roots. There is also gender roles, so there is quite a strict rule regarding to women covering and being separated from the male side of society. So that's quite interesting. So there is a bit more about etiquette, religion, and the arts. On to part 5 now, where we will be exploring some common cultural and linguistics aspects of these countries. 5. So what do these 4 North African countries have in common? We can notice that French has a important status in especially 3 of the countries, except for Libya. And also when it comes to its historical past, as these 4 countries were later on created due to colonialism, and the borders were set. Before that, it was Al-Maghreb al-Arabi, which was the Maghreb of the Islamic Empire, and before that it was a large area of Berber tribes, several Berber tribes that ruled the area. This area also has, as a common historical past, has had Phoenicians as taken over. We have the Romans, the Vandals, Visigothic invasions, and Berber incursions. So we could actually reflect on that and understand that North Africa as a whole is a large was a large semi-autonomous area with large different tribes, and later on became 4 distinct countries. Therefore, and that is why the foods, the etiquettes, the culture, the mentality, and even the genetics are quite similar between the 4 countries. The countries of the Maghreb also share common bilingualism. That's another interesting thing. Even if it doesn't come to French, there's also a large population of Berbers. The culture of the Maghrebs also has similar customs when it comes to marriage and etiquettes, and also when it comes to religion, as 99% of North Africans are by by name Sunni Muslims, so that's quite interesting. Although there was a Fatimid dynasty that took over the area for decades or hundreds of years, and other religious sects from Islam. However, today they are 99% Sunnis. There is also a similarity when it comes to the geographical area, as many of these countries are quite deserted, and although they have a large coastal areas, the population are usually near the sea, and of its land, or a large part of their landmass, are quite hard to reach. And that is one of the reasons that today there is a daunting task of managing the coastal populations. And that's why a lot of the terrain that is in North Africa makes infrastructure development difficult and costly. And as a result, communities outside the coastal or northern areas are quite isolated and poor. Aside from Libya and Algeria's energy wealth, North Africa is largely resource poor, and that could be one of the reasons why Morocco and Tunisia rely on tourism for their livelihood. There is also one of the reasons Morocco has quite an interesting relationship with other parts of Europe, is due to its geographical situation. So it is the closest to Europe, and it also has a large ferry back and forth, or a lot of ships go back and forth from Morocco to Spain, and so Morocco is less isolated from Europe than the other countries. So now on to part 6, we'll be speaking about the gateway to Europe. Part 6, the gateway to Europe migration. So since the Arab Spring about a decade ago, there has been a lot of influx of migrants from Tunisia and Libya, for instance, on to Europe due to the political instability. However, before that, there was an outflow of migrants, especially young migrants, seeking a better life from North African countries. As North African countries are very close to Europe, the way to travel or to reach a European city is by boat, and we do know from the news that many of those boats capsize, and it's quite a dangerous journey. There are also a large amount of sub-Saharan Africans that travel all the way north just to be able to make that crossing. North African countries are more or less the gateway to Europe. And in the last 2 decades, the migration has increased, especially from the Middle East, as civil wars and wars have increased in these areas, and political and instability and poverty has led to many peoples following these journeys onto Europe. So I do cover in the text some numbers about the amount of the migrants that pass through to reach Europe. There has been also a strict rulings that have been made by France, for instance, when it comes to granting visas to young North Africans to reach France, as many of them do not return. So it is an epidemic that has happened for the last few decades and continues to happen, where the instabilities in North Africa has had an effect on the migration or the inflow of migration to Europe. And that's the last of it. So on to next week, so week 5, we will be covering other African or Arabic countries